Hi, everyone, and welcome to AB Conversations, where we will help you CFP your way out of it. A podcast where you get into the minds of a couple certified financial planners on how we think and feel about everyday financial planning questions and what should really matter most to you. A healthier financial life starts.
Hello there, Ben.
Hi,
How are you?
Excellent. Excellent. How are you today?
Doing fine. Today is, well, I don't know if it's recording number 100, but in terms of published episodes, this will be our 100th podcast.
We should be like pros, experts by now.
We should be.
Practice
but every time,
experts.
Yeah, I don't know. Every time we record one, it feels like it's fresh, but that's part of the intent.
Right.
Minimal.
The title is AB Conversations. Just supposed to feel like another day, another conversation. Just happens to be the 100th time we're going to do it formally.
Which is kind of crazy to think about. I don't know if you've reflected on it, but to have done 100 of these is a little bit out of the realm of what I would have considered possible a couple of years ago, before we even started this, or even when we did start it.
Well, I'll reiterate, I have a lot of fun doing it. So if it's helpful to put it out there in the universe, then wonderful. But I think it's a good exercise for us too.
Now I'm just thinking on the fly. So if we've done 100 of them and they average maybe 20 minutes a piece, is my math correct? Is that like 2,000 minutes of our voices? Oof, that is scary. Yeah, it has to be.
Yeah, it's like 33 hours. Okay.
So great. On that note, for anybody who's listened to all of those, please let us know. We'll have to commemorate that in some way, shape, or form.
You deserve a prize, yeah.
Exactly. But in conjunction with our 100th episode, we thought it'd be a fun idea if we kind of loop that back to planning, shocker, but with a specific twist. What if somebody lives to the age of 100, and what planning considerations or strategies would go into preparing for such a reality?
Yeah, I think back to, if you recall, that presentation that we used to do as part of Ameriprise before we decided to no longer be there. Do you remember that? It was called Confident Retirement.
Yes,
and there were 6 different risks. And this, I promise we'll put it in compliance. There's a survey done every year, Retirement Confidence Survey. And there's a couple different risks that retirees and pre-retirees are very aware of. Healthcare was number 1, unexpected events was 2, longevity was 3. It's crazy to think, but living to age 100 can be a huge stressor in your plan. Because all of those other risks, as you age, there's more likelihood you're going to have more healthcare, more unexpected events can pop up, your withdrawal rate matters. I mean, we're going to go into some of these, but longevity ends up being the risk that makes and amplifies all the other risks so much more. So great exercise today. Let's go through planning concepts and strategies if you live, as we hope everyone does, this long and healthy life.
And it's interesting to think about. I think, a lot of people's concerns when they think about retirement and planning for retirement is making sure they don't run out of money, right? That's usually one of the first things that is talked about. But the flip side of that, even though I think it's the exact same conversation, but just looking through a different lens of what if I run out of money, but what if I outlive my money, right? Just if I live a long and healthy life, am I financially prepared for that? And even though I think it's the exact same question, just 2 different lenses, thinking that living a long time is potentially a risk.
Because more often than not, when we have these conversations with clients, I think more often than not, they tell us, I'm not going to live till 95. I'm not going to live till 90. Yet, how are their mom and dad doing? 85, 90. And I mean, we can go into some of it. The reality is life expectancy is going up, right? And there's many different reasons for that. But it does put the onus on us to plan for that. And I think you said it well. if the whole idea is to make sure I don't outlive my money, well, yeah, there's two different ways to look at that. But no matter how you look at it, we need to plan for that.
Right. So then let's dive in, and we'll start with just general overview of life expectancy, just historically, just to give some context. Excuse me. According to the CDC, life expectancy in the year 1900, a short 123 years ago, in the US, was 47 years old, putting us
I'm almost there.
Yeah, putting us solidly in our twilight years if we were born in 1900. By 1950, that had bumped up all the way to age 68, being the average. And as of 2020, the average is now 76, slightly more for females than it is for males. Females close to 79 and males like 73, age 74. But quite a shift from 100 years ago, a decade ago, or so yeah, decade is 10 years, a century ago.
Yeah.
But even though that average is in the 70s now, as you said earlier, we've had many conversations with clients and just asking about longevity in their family. And yeah, whether we've heard a lot of mom and dad or one of each are still doing well into their 90s, relatively healthy, some still independent in their own home at that age. So there's always, you can't necessarily plan on the averages when it comes to something like this. Again, it's better to be prepared than not, obviously. But yeah, when it comes to living a long and healthy life, I've heard from many. It's been a while, but I've heard from many clients, that, and this has always stuck in my head. Just make sure that I'm not eating cat food, when I'm 90 to be able to survive.
Yeah, and that's where these strategies need to come into play. So I think the first one, because it does tie back to your point, like people don't want to run out of money. They don't want to feel like their whole lifestyle or what would make them happy is completely compromised in their last years. It does come back to saving. And I realize that's like the obvious response. But I want to dig a little bit deeper into generation before us. We're working for companies that more often than not put out a retirement plan on behalf of their employees, right? We call that defined benefit plans, pension plans, right?
Yeah.
You work, they set aside money or they force you to set aside money. And then when you retire, here, you've got your benefit and you've got Social Security, and now here's your retirement. Well, fast forward, we're now not in defined benefit plan age. We're in defined contribution plans, right? The onus is on you, the individual, to save and put money into these retirement plans, 401ks, 403bs, to support you. And I think the longer you live, right, and the more that you're having to withdraw from something like that, the pension plan is there to be there until you pass away. The defined contribution plan, your savings, that can dwindle, and it can dwindle quickly. So number one is just to recognize that it does, especially for people that are still working. The onus is now on you to continue to save and make sure that you're doing your best to have that money grow over time.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. I don't want to say it's a simple shift, but just that shift in the retirement savings landscape puts most of the pressure on the person, on the participant or the employee, to do all of that savings for themselves. In the scenario where in the past you had a pension, you had Social Security, you had a bit of a floor, right, in terms of income. And as long as you could live within that and you had other savings, you were good. But yeah, you remove out a good chunk of a guaranteed income, and now you have to replace that in some way, shape, or form. And as you said, that has to come from savings. And even if you've been a good saver, I think the idea, and we did a podcast on this, right? Just flipping the switch in retirement of now, how do I recreate my paychecks? Getting a steady pension, it's predictable. In retirement, if you don't have a pension, you're just recreating it from your savings, it can add a lot of variability into that equation that just for many people, when there is that level of variability in investments, returns, income, taxes, it just adds layers of uncertainty that just doesn't feel good.
Yeah, an opportunity for something to go wrong.
Sure.
And there too, and this ties into another point, and I think I mentioned it, when you think confidence in retirement, one of the things that people worry about even before last year was just inflation. And it's important to
Mm-hmm.
understand what that means in the context of this conversation: savings versus fixed benefits like a pension or Social Security. Most
Right.
pensions don't have a cost of living adjustment. Social Security, we get cost of living on that, but sometimes we would make the argument it's maybe not as much as your expenses going up. So think
Mm-hmm.
about what that means with longevity. You retire at 65 with a pension that's $3,000 a month. That's going to be $3,000 a month at age 90, and then
Right.
at 95, and then,
Right.
per the title of the podcast, at 100.
Yeah.
So the purchasing power of that goes down every year, and the longer you live, it's going to feel like it's going down more and more and more.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, moral of the story, you got to be able to save outside of it. You got to be able to have something that can keep up with inflation.
Yeah. Yeah. So then let's talk about those things. And I think we already kind of touched on two of the three initial ones that we had noted, right? It's inflation is a hurdle for everybody. The savings side of it on the front end. And then I think for many people, when they get to retirement, it's the unknown of potential medical expenses. What am I, not only what am I going to need to cover from my savings just to meet my needs, but it's the unknown in the future of, if I have a health event, or even if you live a long and healthy life, medical expenses are inflating as well.
Yeah.
And as this baby boomer generation is now at this retirement kind of transition point, and that's been going for a few years now, I think it's just going to add to that stress kind of in our society, right? As more and more people are now retired and relying on the medical system in general.
Yeah.
It's to be determined what that's actually going to look like from a cost standpoint. We know it's probably not going to get any cheaper than it is right now, but it's just another one of those unknowns that we can plan for from a savings aspect if if somebody has the not only just the wherewithal but the resources to be set aside and bucketed for healthcare expenses.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things where, as planners, we think about kind of like pinning different savings towards different goals. And, retirement accounts, we think that's going towards recreating retirement paychecks. You have education accounts going towards education. There's just this like pool of money, the up for grabs money that we need to be able to earmark towards other things too. And I think that means staying invested, outside of those retirement accounts as you can, having maybe health savings accounts, these buckets of money that are there for uncertainty in your plan. I mean, I know we as planners will talk about that before we say, hey, you're okay to retire. We're going to think about what are the buffers we need to build in there, not knowing what this will need to be earmarked for, but with these
Mm-hmm.
risks in mind, right? So it's easy. The easiest thing to do for us in this conversation is say, well, if longevity's there and you can live till 100, great news. You're going to live a long and healthy life. By the way, it probably means you should be working longer or saving more. It's not fun to
Yeah.
say that, but especially
Right.
if you are one of those people that sees an opportunity to live a long and healthy life, right? You manage and live a healthy lifestyle. You have a good quality of life. We need to think about not turning that faucet on of recreating paychecks, too soon.
Right. Yeah. And what just popped into my head, and this is going back a few weeks, maybe a month or so, in France, where they were debating raising the retirement age essentially for the government pension. In France, there were protests in the streets for wanting to raise that age in the country. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like 60 to 63 or 65, somewhere in that range. Not out of the realm of what it typically is here in the US either, but just the idea of telling a massive amount of people you have to work years longer is met with resistance. So to your point, but it's the reality of the situation. You think back to generations before us, how many years did they really have in retirement? per se, like on average. It wasn't 20 to 30 plus years.
Right.
It was certainly much shorter. So over time, something in that equation is going to need to shift to make sure that you can continue, if you're going to live longer, that there are the other variables are solved for kind of along the way. And so let's talk about some of those strategies, and then let's talk through like the savings, inflation, and medical expense. Like what are things people could do about that?
Okay, because I had a thought on that, but I think it answers the question that you just posed. We are seeing, and I know we've said this in different spaces, we're seeing more and more people that are willing to earn something in retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our economy is kind of moving in that direction where it's not that difficult to get paid for services or to pick up a little side job, or, hey, I'm willing to do something that kids these days aren't willing to do.
Show up and work.
Yeah. different podcast. But I do think we are seeing more and more people kind of phase into retirement or talk about, look, the simplicity of just mowing some grass, or, not necessarily, maybe not being an Uber driver, but assisting in that way. It feels like it's socialization. So I think that whole get yourself to where you kind of feel financially independent, but if you're willing to still kind of have some sort of income coming in, what is that doing? It's preserving that pool of money that is your golden goose laying your golden eggs to maybe truly be funding the latter years of life and not your initial stage of retirement.
Yeah. And that's obviously one lever that someone can control to a certain extent. Obviously, health can be a factor in when someone retires or how long they can actually work and earn. But yeah, we're delaying retirement, or as you said, transitioning and working part-time for a longer period of time certainly preserves whatever assets you have up until that point. So I guess before someone would get to that decision point of, hey, I'm going to stop working or I'm going to transition, it's reevaluating what you're saving on a regular basis and what is that going to hopefully provide in retirement. What's it actually going to be able to produce? But the other part of that is, how are you invested? And I think that trickles over into the inflation side of the conversation.
Yeah, good point.
As we said earlier, people are living a lot longer in retirement than we have historically, and we need to be able to keep up with inflation. So years and years ago, what may have been, I'm going to use air quotes, relatively easy to earn a rate of return that kept up with inflation, as we live longer, it puts more of the onus on the investor to potentially have to take more investment risk to keep up with inflation over a longer period of time. And I think even that aspect of longevity, for certain people who just are very risk averse and just can't stomach the emotional and psychological ride of investing, it's putting more pressure there where it may not have been before either.
Well, and that to me is the whole psychological part of this, that there is very much, I guess I don't know this to be true. I'm going to say I assume this to be true. There's this common understanding that the closer you get to retirement, the more conservative you should be, right? This is now a finite pool of money that needs to support me for the rest of my life. So I can't put as much of it at risk. When really, I think that may be the exact wrong thing to be thinking, right? I not only need this money to be here for me at 65, but I need it to be there for me at 100. The only way it's going to be there for me at 100 is if I'm trying to seek that rate of return that's more historically like a 5 or 6% instead of 3 or 4, right? That's just the numbers game.
Right.
So yeah, it's some of that needs to be education on our end, to kind of help people understand why. But it also is not just education, it's coaching them through, here's why it's important to stay invested and be seeking growth, not just income.
Yeah. And we often talk about, in certain situations, if people have been good savers, you can I don't want to say flip a coin, but it can be the two conversations of, you have enough saved so you don't necessarily have to take risk, or the other side of that is you have enough saved so you can afford to take risk. And a lot of that does, again, come down to personal preference, but the idea being, if you're going to potentially be in retirement for more than 30 years, sorry, I'm going back to like conversations in my head that I feel like we've had on the podcast, or ones we've definitely had with clients. That is, as you said, as it's believed that once you get to retirement, I need to reduce my risk. But
Right.
we've said it before, whenever that time is that you retire, you're not flipping a switch and now taking all of what you have saved and now, squirreling it away, sticking it in the bank account. And now you're just going to draw it down until the day that you die. It's a very long runway in retirement. So making sure that your money is in spots, and this comes back to our 3-bucket theory. And part of that is just for the mental accounting aspect of it, to make sure you have what you need where you need it, but are still giving yourself that potential for that long-term growth, so that you're not at age 90 feeling perfectly fine and healthy thinking, well, crap, I wish I would have done X, Y, and Z, knowing now that
Right.
I'm still alive and healthy well into my 90s. So
yeah, we could stay there all day.
I was going to pivot to the medical side.
Okay.
So we talked about that a little bit, right? That just being an unknown. And I think beyond just regular healthcare expenses, right? Just going to the doctor, being on Medicare, how that's going to shift and change over time, finding the supplemental coverage, the Medigap plans that are out there. That's one side of it. Long-term care coverage is another just huge unknown that we've seen that can completely derail someone's retirement plan later in life.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because now we're getting into, I think it's a tougher topic. Different people have different goals, but the reality is it's a huge expense, right? And I think the stats are somewhere, even within that retirement planning, confident retirement survey, 2 out of 3 people over the age of 65 are going to need some sort of that care, right? And whether that's assisted care, whether that's home health care, all the way up to semi-private rooms, you're talking ranges, 50, 60, 90 grand a year. Some of this is geographically, depending where you are.
Yeah.
The reality is that's a huge drag on someone's plan. And maybe that's not a huge deal if part of your plan is not to preserve assets for the next generation.
Sure.
But if it is, now we're talking about living to age 100. Again, as there's multiple factors here that could make this a problem. Am I able to preserve assets, and will they get eaten up by these care costs that, again, are very, very common at the end of life?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say there's many different ways to go about that now, to kind of offset some of that risk. I feel like we've talked about this in other podcasts too. Just the long-term care insurance landscape has shifted greatly over the last 5 years, but it's still not inexpensive. It's still not as straightforward as it should be, but again, it's insurance, so I think part of that is by design. But there are different ways to go about it. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, check out the podcast, dedicated directly to it. The point is, if you I will say again, if you are going to really truly plan for longevity, for a long and healthy life to 90, 95, 100, all the more reason before you retire, before you stop earning those paychecks, to consider what those options are to transfer that risk elsewhere. And I like mental accounting. I'm a big proponent of it. If you got to work an extra 6 months to fully pay for that, so it's not coming out of your, retirement paychecks, then that's one way to just say, I'm going to take what could be a risk, me living long and needing this care, and I'm going to try to try to offset some of that by having an insurance paid for, or seeing what insurance I currently have, and can it be shifted to be different and now serve me differently. So there's options there. The point is to have the conversations as early as you can.
Yeah. And I think now pivoting a little bit, one other thing that becomes even more prevalent as we see people continue to age is estate planning. And obviously we're proponents that everybody should have their plans documented. And I don't know the statistics. I feel like we did one on this not too long ago where we talked about the number of people that actually have a will in the US being less than half. Am I remembering that correctly? It's even less than half.
I know I misquoted it when we did that podcast. So I'm not even going to try now. It's not a lot, and it's not enough.
Right. So not only that, but as people get older, I think it's just more of a thought that comes to the forefront. So I think all we want to highlight here is just obviously the importance of having things documented. It's your will, having somebody named as a power of attorney for your financial accounts, having a living will or an advanced healthcare directive, not only so that you can designate some of those decisions in advance, but also to name someone just like your power of attorney, but for healthcare reasons, that if you can't make those decisions for whatever reason, you have somebody that you trust and believe will make the decisions in your best interest. Having those documented is key step number one. But as you continue to age, making sure those things are still up to date. Just something as simple as, if your power of attorney, for example, or no, let me step back to the will. There are, not only do relationships change, right? People are going to be in your will that will change as well over a long period of time. So making sure that you're reviewing something like your estate plan on a regular basis as you continue to get older makes all the sense in the world. We've talked about it before, that for younger people, just get it done, get something set up, and then you can check that box and not have to think about it again for a while. Well, later in life is where that a while kind of drops away, and maybe it's something that needs to be reviewed more frequently.
Yeah, which makes sense. The more the time goes by, the more likely things are to change. So
sure.
I think you said it well, especially as you age. It's all the more important to make sure it says exactly what you need it to say. And yeah, to your point, most importantly, has the right names in there, because that may change as time goes by too. So
yeah.
So I would say, in an effort not to make our 100th podcast last 100 minutes, I think this is a good topic for people that are, even if you're not in retirement yet, if you are in retirement, any of those, reflect a little bit on how longevity could affect your plan. Because I think if we went through the exercise of, reassessing how everybody's doing, there's always opportunity to shift things around a little bit and pull different levers. It's never too late, but the earlier that you can kind of plan for longevity, the better. So hopefully this was helpful.
Yep. Well said.
All right.
Okay.
What do you think? We're going to get another 100 in 3 years from now?
I don't know. What would cause us to stop at this point?
Well, then there's your answer. All signs point to yes.
We'll keep recording as long as people keep listening. And even once they stop, we'll probably still be talking.
It could be. All right. Thank you again for the 100th time. Appreciate being able to partner with you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Catch you next time.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Adam and I really appreciate you tuning in. Please note that the opinions we voiced in the show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be most appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, your accountant, and financial advisor or tax advisor prior to making any decisions or investing. Thanks for listening.